Welcome to the OMS podcast, your ultimate source of information and insights on the medical field. My name is Ronil.
And my name is Victoria, and we are excited to be your co-hosts today.
This podcast is designed for students who want to stay up to date on navigating opportunities in STEM and healthcare, with real advice from post-secondary students and professionals in the field.
Today, we'll be talking about writing research grants and applying to research programs in university. Joining us again today are our guests, Vitoria, Sarah, and Megan.
So tune in, join the conversation, and elevate your knowledge with the OMS podcast. For this week's episode, I'd like to invite our guests, Victoria, Sarah, and Megan once again, who will be talking about research grants. As high school students, thinking about research and grants are always a big question. So that's what we're going to be focusing our episode on today. So I'll pass it off to Victoria for the first question.
Yep, thank you, Ronald. So first of all, there are so many research programs out there that are all highly competitive, as we know it. How do you write a research program application that is able to maximize your competitiveness in a large pool of applicants? And for this question, let's start off with Sarah.
Yeah, so it's definitely challenging to know how to write an application that's really going to demonstrate how much you want or would be suited for a research opportunity. But I think the main thing to do is to highlight the skills that you have coming in that could be really useful to the project that they're doing, and also showing that you have the educational background related to that. I know that doesn't apply to everyone, but ideally you are in a degree or a program that's very related to the lab that you're applying to or the program that you want to be a part of. And that's really helpful for them because they know that you've done stuff theoretically that's related to what they're doing. So then they know that you'd have a good background and good interest doing the actual practical stuff related to that topic. And they're more likely to take you if it's related to your degree. Like for me personally, I'm in a lab that focuses on the cellular origins of brain cancer, and my degree is cell biology. So it ties in really nicely, and then stuff that I learned in class really plays over into what I'm doing in the lab. And I think that was one factor why they took me in, because my degree is very focused on exactly what they're doing. So it really helped them know that I have a passion geared towards what they're doing. Another thing that I think is important is just showing that you're very passionate and interested in specifically their program, rather than kind of doing a dry email or dry application kind of thing where it's very general about your interests and abilities and it could work for many things. I think it really helps someone know that you care about what they're doing if you write it personalized to them and specifically to whatever they're doing, just so that they know that you've taken the time to personalize your application to what they're doing and you actually are interested in only their thing rather than anything they'll take you. I think that really helps them choose you over other candidates who might seem kind of not as favorable towards the opportunity and just trying to get some sort of research. So making that application really geared towards what you're applying to would be something I think helps your competitiveness.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So definitely highlighting your skills and your educational background is very important. And of course, passion in here is also very important. So I like to ask Victoria, so I guess to expand on this question, what are some maybe important skills that a lot of these programs you noticed are looking for?
So to kind of add on to what Sarah was saying, like I feel like programs are looking for students who are able to apply like what they're learning in university to these programs. So I've seen a lot of these competitive research programs are looking for students who are very self-driven and independent, and they're able to drive their own projects and their own work without the supervisor or someone else like really asking too much. So demonstrating that initiative and passion for that program or for whatever the program is doing is very crucial. And I also want to say that it might be beneficial to contact a mentor or some kind of supervisor or a professor to review and to go over your application, because they might know specific ways to phrase and frame your application that might be more successful. So definitely in my career, I've applied to a lot of competitive programs, and I feel like the cutting edge was really having that experienced person look over it and offer advice, because sometimes you might have all the skills, but you're just not presenting them in the way that they might enjoy.
Thank you so much for that. So definitely application of what you've learned and these skills are very important in a competitive environment. And I see that initiative is also crucial to starting, I guess, any project. And of course, reaching out to professionals to like sort of improve your application. So finally, let's give it to Megan for anything that she wants to add on to.
Yeah, so obviously this doesn't apply to everybody, but I think that if you can tie in your personal background into your reasons and motivations for wanting to do a particular type of research, I think it helps create that narrative, and it's really compelling to show researchers like your life story and how that ties in with your personal and professional interests. I think just one other thing to add on is that as much as it is important to showcase your skills and your research experience, I think also taking a good look at the types of programs that you're applying to, because all of these programs are competitive, but they all have different mission statements. So some of them are for students who already have a very strong background in research, and other ones are for students who may actually not have that much research experience or don't have the resources around them in order to participate in research at their home institution. So paying attention to these nuances as well will also help you put your best foot forward in some regard.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely selecting what program is best for you can definitely improve your chances of getting in. So having all three of you answered, I'll give it back to Ronald.
Yeah. And for the next question we're going to talk about is looking at how there's so many different research opportunities. The biggest question a lot of people have is what makes some research opportunities better than others? Are there some common characteristics that allow you to easily differentiate between two opportunities? And to start off, I'll give the mic to Megan.
Yeah, so some things I really look into is how much the principal investigator or the PI really includes undergraduates in the research. And so sometimes you look at their publications and you can see, are undergraduates being included? Do undergraduates have their own like side projects that they have the freedom to explore? Even just something as simple as, does the PI even put their undergraduates on their lab website? These are all little signs that show that this mentor is very passionate about guiding like undergraduate students in order to do research. And I think otherwise, finding good opportunities, I think when you're doing interviews with potential labs, really asking about the culture of the lab, how everyone works together, because it's really important to make sure that you're having a fun and fulfilling time there as well.
Yeah, and I think asking these questions and looking at the lab and stuff can all be very important. I totally agree with that. How about Sarah? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I completely agree with what was said before. I think seeing how much they're willing to include undergraduates in the research they're doing is a big thing, because I do see in my everyday life that there are certain labs that give a lot more exposure to undergraduate students, and then other ones where it's harder for undergrads to find work to do or to have as much experience as they can in their research term. So I think definitely finding an opportunity that gives you the most out of it as possible is the best. I also think something that would be good is just finding an opportunity that gives you what you would like to do, or what something that's going to keep you interested for a very long time in. For example, like if you have an inclination towards like wet lab work and you've gotten something in a dry lab, even though it could be a good experience for you and it's definitely worth looking into, if you know from the offset that you're not going to be as invested or as excited about it, I would say that's also not fair to the project to be sort of getting into something that you know that you're not entirely keen on doing. So I think it goes both ways, making sure that you're getting into an opportunity that you really feel like you'll be excited to give your all to every single day, and that can give you enough back and help you enough to get to be the researcher that you want to be by either including you on papers or including you on work that the grad students or the PI is doing, and helping you become someone who eventually, if you want to go into grad school or go beyond that, you got enough of those skills in undergrad that you can really seamlessly transition into a program like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think being inclusive and making sure that you're actually going to be being a part of the research culture, helping out and getting the exposure that you want is very, very, very important. Victoria, do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, so I 100% agree with Sarah, like about doing something that you're actually interested in, because I see so many of my like peers or like students be engaged in research that they're not actually interested in, or research that they're just doing for their resume, or something that they're not actually passionate about. And so I definitely would say that you're going to spend most of your time like well, at least if you're doing a full-time position, like you're going to spend like so much time at the lab. So it's really important to actually be passionate about what you're doing. And then one thing I also want to add is actually something I got really lucky with, but finding a lab that the social aspect is there. So looking at what undergrads are there, what grad students are there, like what energy is happening at the lab, right? Like having maybe even friends there or like having a good relationship is really important because you're going to spend so much time with these people at the lab that it's really important to have good rapport and to feel included, feel like it's a collaborative space. So definitely social aspect, I think, is probably the number one thing I'm going to look for my next lab. So definitely important.
Yeah, and I think the lab community and just having an overall interest is also very important to make sure that you're motivated to do your work and everything. I totally agree with that. And I'll pass it off to Victoria for the next question.
All right, so for this question, let's take a step back and talk about where we're all getting all of these wonderful research like opportunities from. So we know that great opportunities make up a large portion of someone's success, obviously. But what are some channels through which you hear about the most useful research opportunities? For this question, let's start off with Sarah.
Yeah, so there's many different ways you can find out about research opportunities. One thing that U of C does at least is that they have kind of an email list with a lot of science students on it, or kids from, for example, like a microbiology class. And when there is an opening that they're actively like looking for a student to fill, then everyone gets an email about that. And I feel like that's a good way that someone could get something because they know they're looking for a position, and then it's easier to get it that way. Something that I did when I was in my first year looking for research was just going through the university website and seeing all of the research projects related to a certain topic that I liked, and just looking at all of the things that were going on, all of the professors, and then emailing them, like really reading like 3 or 4 papers of theirs. And then based on that, if I feel like I really like what they're doing, write an email based on what I liked about the research and then asking them if they had a position. That can definitely be frustrating just because a lot of the time it's hard to get responses because, researchers have so much going on and they probably do get a lot of emails from students, especially if this is like a professor who's teaching a class of like 200 kids or even 400. They're going to get a lot of emails asking to have a student in their lab, and usually they can only take up to like 1 or 2 students. So in that case, it could be hard to even get a response. But sometimes you do stumble upon kind of a smaller lab or maybe a professor who many people don't have and something like that, or your interests just really match with the professor that you're reaching out to, and that's a good way. But what worked for me was the first researcher that I actually got a response from didn't have space in her lab. But the thing is, what really helped was that she passed on my information to her friends who are looking for summer students. And they, since they're looking for students, were thankful for it and they considered me right away. And because the recommendation came from their friend, it was kind of like I had already won their favor, which was really nice. So I think if you could find a professor, even if they don't have a spot in your lab, if they say, oh, sorry, there's nothing that I've got, if you could ask them to pass it on to others who might be looking for someone, I think it helps a lot when one of their colleagues sends on a STEM or students information rather than when you just email them, they might not know exactly, like, is this someone that I want to take on? I don't know anything about them. But when it comes from a friend, I think you're more likely to get it. And you're really lucky if you do have a professor or someone who's willing to help you out in that process. I think that really does put you ahead of others and make it more likely for your name to get out there and for you to find an opportunity easily.
Yeah, definitely. So cold emailing a lot of these professors could definitely end up getting you one of these great opportunities. But it's also important to not give up when you don't get a lot of these responses. Okay, so Victoria, would you like to add on?
Yeah, so I actually fell into like the trap of like sending like hundreds of like cold emails a long time ago, like in first year. And I realized that most didn't get any responses, and the responses that I did get weren't successful for me. And what I did find was successful was reaching out in person to profs and going to office hours and finding any opportunity to just chat with them. Because once you're starting talking with professors and researchers, from building those relationships, they're a lot more likely to want to help you in terms of finding a research position. So actually my current lab I found through office hours. So I was attending a course that was in the field that I wanted to do research in. And so I went to the office hours just to chat and get to know the professor. And through this way, I was offered my position currently. And I found that a lot of my peers had similar experiences getting these positions through connections. So not only through profs, but also through TAs. So if you have any TAs who are in grad school or they're undergraduates, they're really likely to know a prof or someone who is doing research and is looking to hire. So definitely make these connections and reach out to people, because the world is really small. Someone always knows like where the next position is going to open up.
Yeah, definitely. So I think what you said, I totally agree with what you said. Making sure to like actually talk to your professor or I guess your researcher in person will definitely help. And finally, Megan, would you like to add on?
Yeah, so honestly, initially when I was looking at labs, I kind of just looked at like the websites like for my department and then also adjacent ones in the life sciences. So that's definitely more of a long-winded process because you have to look at all the different faculty profiles, look at their research interests, and then see whether that opportunity would be suitable for you and your interests. But as I said in one of the earlier episodes, I did take a research course and my professor was super helpful and also recommended to myself and other students potential labs to join. So just echoing what Sarah and Victoria said, making good connections with your professors and your TAs, as they can be really good mentors for hooking you up with different connections. One thing that's also maybe specific to my university, I'm not too sure, but for me in the neuroscience department, they send out a weekly newsletter, and any professors who may be looking for students to join their labs, they can do advertisement and talk about their research and what they're looking for in a potential student. So these are some other ways to do so. Oh, and one last thing is that my school actually has this undergraduate research portal. So a lot of these researchers can post opportunities on there, and then students can make a profile and look at all the different opportunities. And then I guess like just from there, contact the researcher and see if they're interested. So it's like a matching system almost.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds like a great way and a great system to get access to all these opportunities. So thank you all for answering, and I'll pass it back to Ronald.
Yeah. So for the next question, a lot of times when applying to different research programs, there's some red flags that make you think, oh, this one is not very good or should be reconsidered. So what are some of the biggest red flags when applying to research programs, and how are we able to move past these common mistakes to give us the best chances of being accepted? And I'll start off the question with Sarah.
Yeah, this is going to be pretty similar, I think, to stuff we've said before. I think one big red flag is just like a red flag that you could do when applying would be to just sound very impersonal in your email and not really directing your email to the professor and to the lab and just kind of making it seem like a very general application. And in terms of red flags that could be like in the lab itself, I guess, that would be like decreased opportunities for undergrad students or having a lab that's too big that's not going to give you the exposure or the attention that you need during your term. Or another red flag could even just be funding issues. And if you kind of get accepted into a lab, but the funding is not there for you, or you think that there's a chance that closer to the time of the lab starting, it might not work out for you, that's something that's kind of scary to get into because by chance that doesn't work out and you're banking on that one opportunity and then the funding drops or you don't get the grant you're looking for. That's always something that I've heard happen to my friends, and it kind of gets your hopes up and then you realize that you don't have anything. So I think keeping your options open for a while until you can kind of guarantee that you're going to get a position is something that's really nice to avoid if possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. So when doing your emails, making sure that you're using very formal language, and also just making sure you do double checks with the lab to make sure that it's actually what you want to go into, and just making sure that they have the space for you is also very important. Victoria, what do you think about this?
Honestly, I feel like it depends a lot on what you're looking for. So a red flag in a lab might be a green flag for someone else. So for example, something I would consider a red flag is a lab that gets undergrads to do like menial tasks and like things that don't have too much like I guess independence or like intellectual involvement, like tasks just that have to be done by someone. And like this would be a red flag for me because I like having a more intellectual like interaction and participation in projects that I'm involved in. But some students prefer doing these tasks and just completing activities for their lab. So I would definitely say it depends on what you're looking for. So if you're looking for something to be more involved in, then definitely a red flag would be undergrads not having too much involvement, right? And so, yeah, I definitely think it depends on your career goals. Some people just want to do research either as a part-time job or they want to get in the scientific community. So it definitely depends. Yeah. So I feel like doing some reflection and figuring out what your goals are and what you're looking for will help determine what kind of lab experience that you're looking for.
Yeah, I totally agree. Finding a lab that's more based off what you want and your needs is also very important instead of just going for any opportunity, trying to find ones that you think best fit for you. And Megan, what do you think about this?
Personally, for me, I really value the principal investigator being very directly involved with all members of the lab, whether it be like the postdocs, the graduate students, the undergrads, of course. So personally, when I look at a lab, I do pay attention to how they recruit students, for example. So there are some researchers who are very enthusiastic about it, and they will be like, yeah, we're excited to be hiring undergraduates. Please contact me at their email address. But then I also see some professors who just direct the whole recruitment process to one of the staff. And that kind of just shows me that either the researcher doesn't have that much time to dedicate towards mentoring undergraduates, or that they simply don't care enough about mentoring undergraduates. And so both of these kind of turn me off from participating in their lab, because I just think that if the researcher doesn't really even want to read your application and get to know you personally before onboarding you onto the lab, then it makes me wonder what type of mentorship experience I'm going to have inside.
Yeah, I totally agree. Making sure that you're getting the mentorship experience that you want, making sure that they're interacting with you actively is very, very important. And I totally agree with everything all three of you guys have said. And to pass it off to the next question, I'll give it back to Victoria.
All right, this will be the final question. And this is sort of just asking like what a research grant is and sort of just sum it all up. So let's just talk about what is a research grant and why would someone need it? For this one, let's start off with Megan.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, a research grant is basically when you're proposing a research project and you want to get it funded, of course, because a lot of these experiments and equipment cost a lot of money. So, writing a research grant is important for you to convince other people who have that funding that what your work is fundamental to advancing scientific knowledge in general, and just convincing them that your project has scholarly merit. So I know a lot of principal investigators, and they dedicate almost all of their time actually to applying for these grants, because once the money runs out, then you lose that funding, and then you may have to shut down your lab if you don't receive that funding. So that's why they place in such high priority. As undergraduates, I'm honestly not too sure how involved we are in the grant writing process. Maybe Sarah Vitoria can speak to that a little bit more. But for my research class, I did have to practice writing a research grant, and it's definitely very technical, and you also have to find a good balance between being scientifically accurate, but then also using your writing skills and being persuasive as well.
All right, thank you, Megan. So let's move on to Victoria. How would you sort of answer this question?
Yeah, so I actually had to write a bit of a grant. Well, it technically isn't a grant, but it was an application for a studentship for the summer. And one of the things that I realized that it was actually really similar to grants that like PIs write. So like basically a shortened version of that. And I think that there's a lot of small considerations and a lot of like thinking that goes into these types of essays. And I definitely don't, I feel like it would be really hard to do something like that, like on your own, fully independently. So I collaborated a lot with my supervisor to draft something that was going to be successful. And so I think my advice is to look into getting support from your supervisor, and well, I guess most importantly, finding these opportunities for students to get funding to kind of help your PI and help even your resume and getting these awards, I think is really important. So there are a lot of opportunities and they're just there. You have to like find them, but depending on your field. So if you're studying, like if you're doing research in cancer, for example, there will be cancer grants to help out research in this field. A lot of them are for undergrads. And so for me, my field was immunology, and I found a grant that would support my research of the summer. And yeah, like there are a lot of international ones too. Definitely keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There are many different opportunities for writing these grants. Finally, let's pass it off to Sarah.
Yeah, so as mentioned before, there are kind of like two main categories of grants. It would be like the grants for the lab that the PI usually heads the application for, and then summer studentships or term studentships that you would apply for because sometimes labs don't have funding allocated for summer students. So that really helps you keep your position or maybe get some sort of funding additional to what you're getting from the lab. That really helps you out. I've had experience writing both just because I do enjoy writing. And since my PI knew that, he really helped me develop my academic writing last summer, where I helped them write grants for the lab to get funding for a new project that we're working on. So, in that way, I did have a lot of experience with the large scale grant writing. And then because of that, a lot of it translated over to the studentship that I applied for in the winter because I wanted to get some money additional to what my lab was willing to give me and just sort of help support the project that we're trying to do. So since the project that I want to focus on is similar to the grant that I wrote in the summer, I could use a lot of that stuff that I'd written with my PI to develop my application. And as I said before, it's kind of like a mini version of a grant that you would write to a larger company or institute. And it just summarizes on a smaller scale what you will be working on and then how that's going to help your PI. And a lot of the time, you do get a lot of support from your PI. And I think that's important because they have a lot more experience writing these kind of things and getting accepted for them as well. So they know what works, what doesn't work, what it's what's right to say, I guess, in something like this, or what's not to be said. So I got a lot of help with that. And also, I had the background related to that kind of academic writing. And I think it's really good experience if you can get support from your PI or even grad students to learn how to do that. I think it really helps you contribute to the lab in a different way apart from whatever research you're doing to sort of help them get the money that they need to continue stuff, or to even just help yourself out by getting a studentship or an award that's going to help support you. And I think another thing for me was just that by doing the writing for the project, it really helped me solidify my knowledge of what's going on in the project. I think a lot of the time, summer students come into the lab and they're doing work that they kind of understand, but they don't really know what's going on, like the molecular or the deep basis for what they're doing. So by writing a grant, you really need to defend exactly what your project's going to do, what the application of it is in the real world.